The clock ticked in the shadowed corridors of the palace, but no one was counting time in the usual way. For decades, secrets had been buried here. Little slips of paper, whispered conversations, and clandestine glances that carried far more weight than the gilded chandeliers above them. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared anyone for what was about to erupt. Because tonight, the kingdom's most guarded walls were about to crack, and the consequences would ripple through every royal household. Have you ever wondered what happens when ambition turns into desperation? When power becomes obsession? When familial loyalty is tested to the breaking point? Tonight, we are about to witness it firsthand. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started with a whisper. Innocuous at first, almost laughable if you had heard it in passing. "Did you hear about the threat?" one aide murmured to another, glancing over her shoulder. But that whisper carried the weight of a bomb. The name of the person at the center of it was one that everyone thought they knew, but the truth lurking behind the public smiles and perfect appearances was something no one could have anticipated. Secrets that were supposed to remain locked away for eternity were suddenly spilling into the light. And at the heart of it all, the question that now haunts every corner of the palace. How far can someone go to protect what they believe is theirs? To control, to dominate, to obliterate a rival before they can even rise? It is a question that historians and psychologists alike have debated for centuries, but tonight, it would be answered not in dusty tomes, but in real time, in flesh and blood, with consequences so extreme that even the most seasoned royal insiders were left speechless. Our story begins with a dinner party. On the surface, it was meant to be a simple gathering, small, discreet, almost banal in its intent. But behind the closed doors, tensions simmered like lava beneath a fragile crust. There were glances that lingered too long, smiles that were just a fraction too forced, and conversations carefully designed to mislead. It was a stage, a theater of politeness, but the actors were performing with knives hidden behind their backs. No one knew exactly when the tipping point would arrive, but it was coming, and everyone would feel the impact. Prince Harry had been observing quietly, his mind sharper and more calculating than anyone realized. While the cameras and public eyes saw him as the charming younger royal, the one caught between duty and modernity, what no one noticed was the storm brewing behind those eyes. He had been piecing together clues, seemingly insignificant details that, when combined, formed a picture so dark it would make the palace shudder. He had witnessed the subtle maneuvers, the whispered threats, the veiled comments that hinted at schemes far beyond simple rivalry. And the truth, when it finally emerged, would shock not just the royal family, but the entire world. Meanwhile, Meghan had been moving with her own agenda. Brilliant, calculated, and unapologetically ambitious, she had spent years constructing a persona, a brand, and a narrative that would ensure she stood at the pinnacle of influence. But ambition, when unchecked, has a way of bending morality, distorting judgment, and creating enemies even where none are needed. The problem was that her targets were not mere colleagues or competitors, they were family. And in this kingdom, family is both shield and sword. Betray the wrong person, and the repercussions can be catastrophic. And then there was Catherine. Poised, graceful, seemingly untouchable in the public eye, she had quietly built her own network of influence, a world apart from the media's glare, but intertwined with it in subtle, strategic ways. Her lifestyle ventures, her public engagements, her philanthropic efforts, they were not just for show. Each step, each initiative, each calculated appearance was part of a larger chessboard. And little did she know, the very moves she thought were hers alone had caught the attention of someone who was watching, analyzing, and plotting a response. But here is where the story takes its darkest turn. Whispers of threats, hints of coercion, and actions that cross lines no one should ever approach. The palace, built on centuries of tradition and decorum, suddenly became a battlefield. Trust, that most fragile of currencies, evaporated. Alliances shifted. The people who once smiled together at public appearances now regarded each other with suspicion. The unseen hand of ambition was no longer subtle. It was brazen, almost theatrical in its execution. And at the center of it all was a revelation so shocking that it would upend everything the public thought they knew about loyalty, love, and betrayal in the royal family. Imagine standing in a room where everyone is smiling, yet every gesture, every glance, every word is layered with hidden intent. Imagine realizing that someone you trusted implicitly has been plotting, calculating, and maneuvering in ways you could never anticipate. How do you react when the person you believe to be your ally is suddenly revealed as a potential threat? It is a scenario that reads like fiction, but in the corridors of this palace, it became terrifyingly real. And then came the moment when all the threads converged, the piece of information that no one could have predicted, the confession that shattered the carefully constructed facade. Prince Harry, torn between loyalty to his family and the need for transparency, made a choice that would change everything. The world outside, always hungry for scandal, was not prepared for what he revealed. Because when ambition meets desperation, the consequences are not just personal. They reverberate across institutions, media, and public perception, altering lives forever. The palace staff whispered that the air had changed. Courtiers who had spent decades navigating subtle power plays now found themselves in uncharted territory. Security protocols, previously routine, suddenly became urgent. Meetings once mundane turned into strategic briefings. Everyone sensed the storm coming, but no one could predict its full impact. And as the news began to leak, carefully, strategically, through channels that ensured maximum disruption, the world braced itself for a revelation that would dominate headlines for weeks, months, perhaps even years. But here is the twist. The story is not just about betrayal or ambition. It is about human vulnerability, about the complexity of relationships, and about the moral gray areas that exist in every family, royal or otherwise. It forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. How far would you go to protect your legacy? Would you risk everything, including your reputation and freedom, to eliminate a threat? And, most importantly, what happens when the people you love are the very ones who could betray you? By the end of tonight's story, we will have witnessed the unraveling of carefully constructed identities, the exposure of hidden agendas, and the dramatic consequences of actions taken in the shadows. And while the palace walls may appear pristine and impenetrable, the events that unfold will reveal cracks that are both literal and metaphorical, cracks that no amount of public relations spin can conceal. So, as we begin this journey, ask yourself, what would you do if the people closest to you were capable of unimaginable actions? If ambition, jealousy, and fear collided in a single, explosive moment, how would you respond? Because tonight, the answers will unfold before your eyes, and the events that follow will redefine everything you thought you knew about loyalty, family, and power. But beware, just when you think you understand the story, the next revelation will hit like a thunderclap, leaving everyone stunned and questioning what is real and what is carefully orchestrated drama. And the first shock is coming sooner than you think. A single choice, a single revelation, will set the stage for chaos, intrigue, and heartbreak that no one could have anticipated. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The evening air was crisp, the kind that makes every breath feel sharper, more immediate. Lanterns flickered along the palace gardens, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits across the manicured hedges. Inside, the grand dining hall gleamed with chandeliers, polished silverware, and the faint scent of jasmine drifting from floral arrangements. To the untrained eye, it was just another formal gathering. Royals, aides, and a handful of carefully vetted guests sharing pleasantries over carefully curated menus. But nothing about this evening was ordinary. Every glance carried weight. Every laugh concealed calculation. Every toast might have been a prelude to betrayal. Prince Harry arrived quietly, his expression unreadable. In public, he had always been seen as the affable younger royal, the one who could charm cameras and the crowd with ease. But tonight, there was a steeliness in his eyes, a subtle, almost imperceptible tension. He had learned to observe, to notice what others assumed went unseen. The layout of the room, the positioning of the guests, the timing of their entrance, all of it mattered. And tonight, it mattered more than ever. Because hidden behind the polite smiles and gentle clinking of glasses were intentions far darker than anyone outside could imagine. Meghan moved with her usual confidence. her presence commanding attention without effort. There was a precision to her gestures, a calculated elegance in every word she spoke. But beneath the polished exterior, a storm brewed. She had spent months, years even, building influence and securing her ventures. Every alliance, every compliment, every subtle suggestion of friendship had been part of a larger strategy. She had learned early that in this world, perception could be as powerful as action. And yet, tonight, she could feel the threads of control slipping, an unfamiliar anxiety prickling at the edges of her mind. Catherine arrived later, understated yet radiant, her aura one of calm authority. To the outside world, she was the embodiment of poise, a public figure whose initiatives, lifestyle projects, and charitable endeavors seemed effortless. But she had her own chessboard in motion. Every handshake, every smile, every carefully timed announcement was a move calculated for impact. She had no idea how closely she was being observed, or how those watching had begun to anticipate her every step. The dinner began with the usual small talk. Weather, recent engagements, mutual acquaintances. But beneath the surface, conversation was a minefield. Every comment carried double meanings. Every anecdote was a test. Harry watched closely, piecing together fragments that others might dismiss as trivial. He had noticed the way Meghan's gaze lingered slightly too long when Catherine mentioned a potential new lifestyle brand. He had caught the subtle inflection in her voice, the hint of tension that betrayed unspoken stakes. And most alarmingly, he had begun to detect the calculated undercurrent that suggested actions far more sinister than mere rivalry. Throughout the dinner, aides and staff moved with quiet precision, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, of the silent war unfolding in plain sight. Plates were arranged, glasses refilled, and subtle nods exchanged across the table. But the real drama was invisible to anyone not paying attention. Every word, every movement, every nuance carried meaning. And Harry, ever vigilant, had begun connecting the dots, realizing that a threat far more serious than anyone dared imagine had been forming in secret. As the main course arrived, Meghan leaned forward slightly, engaging Catherine in what seemed to be a casual conversation about upcoming projects. On the surface, it was polite, even friendly. But Harry noticed a tension that was almost palpable. The tiny pauses, the barely noticeable shifts in posture, the carefully chosen words that hinted at deeper, more dangerous intentions. It was in that moment that he understood what had seemed like rivalry was, in fact, something far more calculated, far more personal, and potentially catastrophic. And then came the subtle reveal, the fleeting moment that no one else noticed but Harry. A glance, a nearly imperceptible tightening of the lips, a shift in tone that carried an unspoken message. It was enough to confirm his suspicions. Meghan's ambitions were no longer just professional. They were intertwined with personal vendettas, with desires that could destabilize not just relationships, but entire public narratives. Harry felt a chill run down his spine. He knew he had to act carefully, not with brute force or public confrontation, but with strategy. Because the stakes were nothing less than the safety and reputations of those he loved, and the exposure of a plot that had been meticulously hidden. Dessert arrived, a delicate array of pastries and fruit, but the sweetness could not mask the bitterness in the air. Subtle accusations were made through tone and inflection, threats veiled in politeness. A single misstep could unravel months of planning, and Harry could see that tension teetering on the edge. He had to be the one to navigate the fragile web of alliances, to read between the lines, and to prepare for the revelation that would soon change everything. As the evening drew on, conversations grew quieter, more calculated. The staff, oblivious to the true gravity of the gathering, continued their routine. But Harry's mind raced, piecing together fragments of overheard remarks, subtle gestures, and inconsistencies in timelines and stories. He realized that the plot, carefully crafted in shadowed whispers and private meetings, was closer to fruition than anyone could imagine. And the consequences, when revealed, would be explosive. By the time the last course was cleared, the room seemed calm on the surface, but Harry knew better. He had gathered the evidence, identified the motives, and now had to consider his next move. The kingdom, the family, and the public had no idea that they were on the brink of a revelation that could redefine alliances, expose ambitions, and ignite a scandal far beyond the palace walls. And just as the guests began to rise from their seats, preparing to leave the hall with smiles and courteous farewells, Harry made a silent decision. The first steps toward exposing the truth had to be calculated, precise, and timed to perfection. Because one wrong move, one premature revelation, and the consequences could be disastrous. But Harry also knew that inaction was no longer an option. What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that none of them could control. Secrets would be revealed. Alliances would fracture. Loyalties would be tested. And as the palace doors closed behind the last departing guest, the calm exterior of the evening shattered, leaving only tension, suspicion, and the looming threat of exposure. And just when it seemed that the night could not grow more charged, a message arrived, quiet, unassuming, but loaded with implications. A single line, a single note, a silent harbinger of the chaos to come. It was the spark that would ignite a firestorm, a revelation that would leave the royal family reeling. And as Harry read the message, the weight of its content pressed down on him. The plot was far more dangerous than anyone had anticipated, and the consequences would ripple through every corner of the palace and beyond. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The morning light streamed through the palace windows, cutting across the opulent corridors in sharp, golden lines. To an outsider, the palace seemed serene, a picture of royal stability. But inside, the air was thick with unease. Word of the previous night's dinner had already begun to circulate quietly among the staff, whispered in hushed tones in hallways and stairwells. There were questions no one dared ask aloud, glances that lingered too long, and a palpable sense that something monumental was about to unfold. Prince Harry paced his private quarters, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind a whirlwind of strategy and caution. The message he had received last night was simple in its delivery, but devastating in implication. One line, carefully phrased, carried the weight of months of plotting, a warning that could not be ignored. The sender had chosen anonymity, hiding behind layers of precaution, but Harry understood the subtle cues. This was no idle threat, no rumor meant to unsettle him. It was real, and it was urgent. He read the words again, slowly, deliberately. Each phrase seemed innocuous on the surface, yet beneath it lay a clear, unmistakable warning. Someone within their inner circle had crossed a line, orchestrating moves that could destabilize relationships, reputations, and lives. The thought churned in his stomach like a storm at sea. What if the warning was true? What if the intentions it hinted at went beyond rivalry or ambition into something far darker? Meanwhile, Meghan was already in motion. Her schedule, outwardly designed for meetings, interviews, and philanthropic appearances, was in reality a careful dance of surveillance, coordination, and maneuvering. She had learned early that information is power, and tonight's revelations, or the potential for them, threatened to undermine years of calculated influence. Meghan's eyes scanned her phone, her mind mapping contingencies, backup plans, and potential distractions. She had built walls around her intentions, but Harry's vigilance had begun to erode them. And for the first time, she felt the creeping unease that comes when someone sees too clearly through your carefully curated facade. Catherine, oblivious to the clandestine messages and the silent wars being waged around her, focused on her plans for her lifestyle brand. She had been preparing for months, designing, strategizing, and aligning resources to ensure a launch that would leave a significant mark. Her work was meticulous, her focus absolute. But unbeknownst to her, the attention she had drawn had shifted from admiration to apprehension. For some, her success represented a threat, a rival force that could not be tolerated. The palace buzzed with subtle tension. Courtiers and aides, each carrying their own loyalties, navigated the shifting landscape with caution. Even the most seasoned staff felt the subtle tremors of an impending revelation. Conversations that once flowed freely were now loaded with subtext, every compliment and inquiry carefully weighed. And amidst all this, Harry began piecing together fragments from last night's dinner. The slight glances, the tense pauses, the carefully coded words. To form a picture of the threat he had yet to fully confront. Harry called for a private meeting with his closest aides. The room, typically a place for routine planning, felt like a war room. He outlined his suspicions carefully, sharing only the fragments necessary to convey the gravity of the situation without tipping off those who might be involved in the plot. "We're dealing with more than ambition," he said, his voice low but steady. "This isn't just rivalry. Someone's intentions are personal, targeted, and potentially dangerous. We have to act before it escalates." The aides exchanged uneasy glances. The palace had weathered scandals before, but nothing like this. The idea that someone could leverage personal relationships to manipulate outcomes, threaten initiatives, and destabilize trust was chilling. They all knew that missteps in this environment could have ramifications beyond the palace walls: media scrutiny, public outrage, and irreversible reputational damage. Meanwhile, Meghan sensed the tightening scrutiny. Every phone call, every email, every meeting was now a potential trap. Her ambition, which had been a source of pride and power, now felt like a double-edged sword. The closer she got to her goals, the more visible her movements became, and the more vulnerable she felt. A misstep could unravel her carefully constructed network, expose her intentions, and place her under scrutiny she could not escape. Catherine, still unaware of the storm approaching, continued refining her brand strategy. She focused on the creative elements, the partnerships, the media approach. But the undercurrent of tension around her was invisible only because she trusted the facade of public smiles and polite exchanges. What she did not yet understand was that the moves she considered harmless, or even empowering, had been noticed, evaluated, and deemed a threat. The turning point came in the form of a single, seemingly mundane phone call. A member of the staff, tasked with routine communication, delivered a message that at first seemed trivial, a logistical note about schedules, a casual reminder. But Harry recognized the hidden meaning immediately. The timing, phrasing, and delivery carried layers of intent, a coded signal that confirmed his suspicions. The threat was real, and it was closer than anyone imagined. Harry realized that he had to escalate. He could no longer rely on observation alone. The message he had received, combined with the evidence he had pieced together, demanded confrontation and strategic action. But how to do so without provoking the very escalation he feared? How to protect those at risk while navigating the intricate social and political web that defined the palace? The day passed with calculated precision. Meetings, public appearances, and routine palace activities continued, but beneath the surface, a silent war raged. Harry meticulously tracked movements, conversations, and subtle signals, building a dossier of observations, incidents, and patterns. Every detail mattered, every nuance was critical. And as the sun began to set, he knew that the moment for decisive action was approaching. As evening fell, the palace seemed to settle into a deceptive calm. Guests mingled, staff carried out their duties, and the public narrative remained untouched. But Harry knew the storm was only gathering momentum. Somewhere within these walls, intentions lurked that could explode at any moment, shattering trust, exposing ambition, and altering the course of the family and the kingdom. And just as he was preparing to make the first move, the final, most chilling confirmation arrived. A second message, unmistakably clear, directly confirming the scope of the plot. This time, there was no ambiguity. The threat was immediate, precise, and dangerous. Harry's mind raced. Every contingency had to be considered, every potential outcome evaluated. Inaction was no longer an option. And yet, the first move had to be careful, strategic, and irreversible once set in motion. The palace, for all its grandeur and tradition, had become a trap, a web of hidden intentions, secret observations, and imminent confrontations. And as the night deepened, the first steps toward exposing the hidden plot were about to be taken. Steps that would ignite a chain reaction no one could stop. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The quiet of the early morning was deceptive. Palace corridors, bathed in the pale glow of dawn, seemed tranquil, almost serene. The guards performed their rounds with mechanical precision, unaware that beneath the surface, the gears of a dangerous scheme were already in motion. Prince Harry, however, could feel it. The tension vibrating like an electric current through the walls and floors of the royal residence. Something was about to break, and the first pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. It began with an unexpected discovery. Harry had requested access to Archive's long-considered routine, dusty volumes of ledgers, guest logs, and internal correspondence that most considered mundane. But for him, patterns were hidden in plain sight, and anomalies leapt off the page. Small discrepancies, a name missing from a guest list, a meeting recorded differently in two separate logs, a casual note scrawled with a handwriting style he recognized, began forming a larger, more disturbing picture. The first realization hit him like a physical blow. Meghan's maneuvers were not only strategic but preemptive. Every move she had made in recent months, the public appearances, her subtle references to her projects, the veiled compliments directed at Catherine, was part of a larger design to control outcomes before they could threaten her position. But there was more. There were instructions embedded in the correspondence, coded language indicating contingencies if Catherine's projects gained momentum. It wasn't merely rivalry. It was manipulation, surveillance, and, Harry suspected, a deliberate plan to destabilize not just initiatives but personal relationships. The palace library became a war room. Papers were spread across long oak tables. Files were opened, closed, cross-referenced. Harry's aides worked quietly, their eyes scanning, recording, and confirming the patterns he had spotted. Each piece of evidence was a thread in a larger tapestry, one that, if unraveled, would reveal intentions so bold they seemed almost unthinkable. Every note, every schedule, every hidden message whispered of a mind planning for both influence and control. It was during one of these late-night sessions that the most damning discovery came to light. Tucked between seemingly benign notes about events and appearances, Harry found a set of letters, handwritten, private, and unmistakably deliberate. They contained suggestions, warnings, and even veiled threats aimed at Catherine, should her projects threaten Meghan's ambitions. The language was subtle but unmistakable, coded, indirect, yet chilling in implication. Harry's stomach tightened. These were not casual musings. They were plans, and they carried the potential to destabilize the entire family dynamic if left unchecked. As he read, a series of questions formed in his mind. How long had this been brewing? Who else knew? How many people were unwittingly complicit by remaining silent or by serving as intermediaries? And, most importantly, how could he act without triggering the very chain of events the letters seemed designed to provoke? Every decision carried weight. One misstep could make private ambitions public, sparking scandal, mistrust, and irreversible fallout. Meanwhile, Meghan's routine continued, her movements seemingly casual, her charm effortlessly maintained. But Harry had begun to see through the veneer. Every meeting, every scheduled lunch, every casual exchange of information was now viewed as a calculated maneuver. And tonight, with Catherine preparing for a major announcement regarding her lifestyle brand, the stakes had reached a peak. Meghan's influence extended further than most imagined, but now Harry had the evidence, and the responsibility, to ensure that it would not tip the balance into chaos. Catherine, blissfully unaware of the unfolding intrigue, finalized her presentation, her heart and mind focused on creative vision and strategic partnerships. She did not yet comprehend the magnitude of the forces arrayed around her, the silent currents of rivalry and ambition poised to interfere. But Harry, knowing the peril, began assembling a plan to expose the hidden plot without causing immediate harm. He understood the delicacy required. Too much exposure could provoke retaliation. Too little could allow the plan to proceed unchecked. The palace itself seemed to respond to the tension. Hallways echoed differently, almost as if they were aware of the stakes. Staff members, oblivious to the high-level scheming, moved with nervous precision, their actions unknowingly intersecting with the unfolding drama. Courtiers whispered in corners, sensing unease but unable to identify its source. The subtle power plays that had existed for centuries now seemed amplified, every gesture laden with potential consequences. As Harry pieced together the timeline, the letters revealed something more troubling. Contingency plans that extended beyond professional rivalry. There were references to manipulating perception, influencing media narratives, and ensuring that Catherine's ventures could be slowed or derailed before they gained significant traction. The strategy was meticulous, patient, and personal. The realization hit Harry hard. This was no longer just a matter of ambition. It was a deliberate effort to control outcomes through intimidation and interference. He knew he needed a strategy that balanced exposure with discretion. Acting too openly could create a spectacle, drawing public attention in a way that might endanger Catherine or exacerbate tensions with other family members. Acting too covertly could allow the plot to continue unchecked, enabling Meghan to maintain the upper hand. It was a delicate balance, requiring precision, foresight, and calculated risk. By evening, Harry had assembled his inner circle for an urgent meeting. The room, usually a place for logistical planning, now resembled a command center. He laid out the evidence, carefully presenting the letters, schedules, and patterns he had uncovered. The aides listened intently, their expressions a mixture of shock, concern, and determination. For the first time, the silent plan that had been unfolding in shadows was fully revealed to those who could act on it. But even as they strategized, Harry knew there was a ticking clock. Catherine's upcoming announcements, media coverage, and public appearances were imminent. The exposure of the letters, the revelations of hidden maneuvers, and the disclosure of the intent behind them would have immediate consequences. Timing, as always in matters of intrigue, would be everything. And just as the group began to outline a plan of action, an unexpected twist arrived. A member of the staff, previously considered loyal and discreet, slipped a note under Harry's door. Simple in appearance, it carried a weighty warning. Someone else had been observing his investigation. The plot had layers he had not yet uncovered, and moving too hastily could endanger not just Catherine, but the entire family dynamic. The realization was chilling. They were not just uncovering a plot. They were stepping into a web of intrigue that was far more extensive than anyone had realized. Harry felt the gravity of the moment settle on his shoulders. Every decision, every action, would have consequences. The palace, with all its history, tradition, and outward calm, was now a pressure cooker of ambition, secrecy, and hidden intentions. And as night fell, the first steps toward revealing the hidden plot were about to take shape. Steps that would ignite a sequence of events none of them could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace seemed quieter than usual that evening, but the calm was an illusion. Behind the gilded doors and polished walls, tension coiled like a predator waiting to strike. Prince Harry moved through the corridors with purpose, each step measured, each glance alert. The evidence he had uncovered was irrefutable, and the realization weighed heavily on him. This confrontation was inevitable. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. The dining room was prepared once again for an evening gathering, though this time it was smaller, more private, the kind of meeting that was intended to settle disputes. But Harry knew better. In the world of royal ambition, no meeting is ever neutral. Every word, every gesture, every pause carries a subtle, often invisible power. Meghan arrived with her usual poise, a practiced smile that belied the undercurrent of tension she surely felt. She had sensed that Harry had uncovered something, though she had no idea of the full extent. Confidence, after all, is often the first line of defense against scrutiny. Catherine entered the room, her presence commanding and calm, unaware of the silent storm surrounding her. Her posture, her careful steps, and her controlled expression all projected authority. But even she could not hide the vulnerability that comes when one is unknowingly at the center of a dangerous plot. Every instinct told her that this meeting was not just a formality, and yet she remained composed, as she always did, ready to face whatever challenges might come her way. Harry initiated the conversation with careful precision, starting with neutral topics, small talk designed to gauge reactions. The room's atmosphere was charged, a delicate balance of polite civility and unspoken awareness. As the dialogue progressed, Harry began to introduce subtler points, testing responses, observing microexpressions, noting shifts in tone and posture. Every flicker of hesitation, every shift in gaze, every carefully chosen word revealed hidden intentions. And then, the moment came. A phrase, innocuous to anyone else, set the room on edge. Meghan's expression faltered, a subtle tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible stiffening of her posture. Catherine, still composed, noticed the shift and leaned forward slightly. Curiosity piqued, sensing tension that had previously been invisible. Harry seized the opportunity, carefully pressing, guiding the conversation toward the truths that had remained hidden. The room was electric with suspense. Staff members, politely excused from the immediate vicinity, exchanged nervous glances in the hallways. The palace walls, witnesses to centuries of intrigue, seemed to close in as the conversation unfolded. Harry revealed fragments of evidence, carefully selected to confirm suspicions without provoking an immediate backlash. The strategy was delicate. The aim was to expose intentions while maintaining control of the situation. Every word mattered. Meghan, caught in the crosshairs of observation and subtle accusation, adjusted her tone, her voice a blend of charm and calculation. But Harry's careful presentation left little room for evasion. The coded intentions, the contingency plans, and the veiled threats were now in play, their implications undeniable. He watched, alert, as reactions flickered across her face: denial, deflection, hesitation, and finally, a calculated composure that attempted to mask awareness. Catherine, initially puzzled by the exchange, began to understand the gravity of the situation. The subtle manipulation, the carefully orchestrated movements that had gone unnoticed for months, were now laid bare. Her mind raced, connecting the dots between gestures, timing, and communications she had previously considered trivial. The realization was sobering. She had been targeted, her initiatives scrutinized and threatened, by someone who had cultivated influence and control to unprecedented levels. The tension escalated as Harry continued to probe, revealing the interconnected threads of evidence he had meticulously pieced together. Every revelation was designed to destabilize deception, exposing the hidden intentions in a controlled but undeniable manner. Meghan's responses, calculated and deliberate, attempted to deflect and control, but the weight of the evidence left her with little room to maneuver. Each admission, each subtle acknowledgement, intensified the gravity of the confrontation. As the conversation reached its peak, the room held its collective breath. The silent battle of wills, intellect, and strategy was now laid bare, with each participant fully aware that the stakes were higher than ever. Trust, once assumed, had been shattered. Alliances, previously considered secure, were now tested under the relentless pressure of revelation. Every word spoken in the ornate room was a potential pivot point, capable of shifting power, perception, and outcomes in an instant. And then came the unexpected twist. Just as Harry prepared to conclude the confrontation, a message arrived, delivered with silent precision, unassuming yet undeniable in its significance. The note, discreet but unmistakable, revealed that the plot was more extensive than any of them had imagined. There were additional layers, hidden contingencies, and covert players who had been silently observing, waiting for the right moment to act. The realization struck. The confrontation was far from over. It was merely the first act in a far more complex, dangerous sequence. The room seemed to contract with the weight of this revelation. Meghan, Catherine, and Harry exchanged glances that carried unspoken understanding, recognition, and tension. Each now knew that the events unfolding were not merely about ambition, rivalry, or perception. They were about control, influence, and the delicate balance between loyalty and self-preservation. Every decision from this point forward would carry consequences, some immediate, others potentially long-lasting. Harry felt the pressure mounting. Acting too hastily could provoke retaliation. Acting too cautiously could allow the plot to proceed unchecked. The palace, with its centuries of tradition and carefully maintained order, had become a chessboard of strategy, observation, and hidden maneuvers. The stakes had never been higher, and the next steps would define not only the evening but the trajectory of relationships, influence, and public perception. As the confrontation drew to a tense pause, a single thought echoed through Harry's mind. This was only the beginning. The layers of intrigue, manipulation, and ambition had yet to fully unravel. And just as he prepared to take the next calculated step, a final, chilling message arrived, delivered through channels previously thought secure, confirming that the stakes were even higher and the consequences far more immediate. than anyone had anticipated. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace corridors were unusually still that morning, the faint hum of distant conversations barely reaching the higher halls. Sunlight spilled over marble floors, reflecting the perfection of centuries-old design. But perfection was only a veneer. Beneath the surface, currents of tension moved silently, imperceptible to casual observers, but palpable to anyone paying attention. Prince Harry felt it acutely, an invisible weight pressing on every step, every glance, every decision. The confrontation the night before had revealed hidden intentions, tested loyalties, and exposed vulnerabilities that could no longer be ignored. Harry had begun to understand the complexity of the forces he was navigating. The letters, messages, and subtle observations pointed to a network of influence that extended far beyond Meghan's immediate sphere. There were courtiers, advisors, and aides whose loyalty was uncertain, some swayed by ambition, others by personal agendas, all contributing to a web of intrigue that now threatened to destabilize everything he had hoped to protect. The palace, grand and imposing, suddenly felt claustrophobic, a gilded labyrinth filled with secrets and shadows. It was during this tense morning that an unexpected ally emerged. Someone who had previously remained in the periphery, quietly observing, suddenly stepped forward, offering insight and information that Harry had not anticipated. The individual was unassuming, with no apparent agenda, yet their knowledge of internal movements, communications, and subtle power plays was invaluable. They had noticed inconsistencies, patterns, and deviations that corroborated Harry's suspicions, providing context and clarity to a situation that had grown dangerously complex. The meeting took place in a secluded chamber, away from prying eyes. The allies' demeanor was calm, almost casual, but Harry sensed the gravity behind their words. Every detail shared added a new layer to the emerging picture of the hidden plot. Strategies, contingency plans, coded messages. All the pieces were slowly falling into place, revealing a design more intricate and audacious than he had first imagined. "Not everything is as it seems," the ally began, their voice quiet but deliberate. "Some of the actions you've observed are distractions. Others are intended to mislead, to create a false sense of security. Pay attention to what isn't said as much as to what is. That's where the real danger lies." Harry listened intently, recording every nuance, every implication. The allies' insight confirmed his growing suspicion. Meghan's maneuvers were methodical, layered, and far-reaching. But there was hope. With the right strategy, the network of influence could be disrupted, the intentions exposed, and the outcomes redirected in favor of those seeking to prevent harm and protect trust. Meanwhile, Meghan continued her outward routine, projecting confidence and control. She moved through her engagements with the precision of someone fully aware of her image, her influence, and the stakes at hand. Yet beneath the composed exterior, cracks were forming, subtle hesitations, brief flashes of doubt, and careful recalibrations of her approach. She was aware that her plans were being observed more closely than she had anticipated, and for the first time, she sensed that her position was vulnerable. Catherine, still largely unaware of the extent of the surveillance and plotting, focused on her public initiatives, completely absorbed in her work. The creativity and precision she applied to her projects were unmatched, yet she remained vulnerable to forces she could neither see nor anticipate. The Allies' revelations highlighted the urgency. Actions had to be taken to safeguard her, to prevent interference, and to counteract subtle manipulations before they could escalate. Harry devised a cautious plan. The Allies' information allowed him to identify weak points in Meghan's network, opportunities to intervene without provoking immediate retaliation. Timing, discretion, and strategy were critical. Any misstep could escalate the situation, drawing unwanted attention or undermining the delicate balance of relationships within the palace. Every move had to be calculated, every decision weighed against potential consequences. As the day progressed, Harry coordinated with his ally in quiet, controlled exchanges, preparing the first steps of intervention. He analyzed movements, communications, and behaviors, creating a timeline that would allow him to reveal the hidden plot at the most effective moment. Each insight from the ally was a key to unlocking the deeper layers of ambition, manipulation, and influence that had remained hidden until now. The palace staff, oblivious to the intricacies of these maneuvers, went about their routines with habitual precision. Guards, aides, and courtiers maintained appearances of normalcy, unaware that the quiet corridors they patrolled were now arenas of strategy, observation, and subtle power struggles. Even the most routine interactions were laden with significance, each one a potential signal or distraction within the larger unfolding drama. By late afternoon, Harry and his ally had assembled a comprehensive understanding of the hidden plot, its potential consequences, and the key points where intervention could be most effective. The next step was critical. Exposure, confrontation, and protective measures had to be executed with precision. There was no room for error. The palace itself, with all its grandeur and history, had become a chessboard of power, trust, and hidden intentions, and every move from this point forward would shape the outcome in ways that could not be reversed. But before any action could be taken, an unforeseen complication arose. Another note, seemingly minor, arrived in the same covert manner as before. It indicated that someone else within the palace had been watching Harry's efforts, monitoring the emerging strategy, and potentially preparing a countermeasure. The realization sent a chill through him. The web of intrigue was more complex, more dangerous, and more unpredictable than even he had anticipated. Harry knew then that the upcoming confrontation would require not just strategy, but courage, judgment, and impeccable timing. The palace, the family, and the stakes themselves demanded vigilance, patience, and decisive action. Every step forward would test loyalty, patience, and resolve. And as evening approached, the first coordinated moves to disrupt the hidden plot were set into motion, laying the groundwork for revelations, confrontations, and consequences that would shock everyone within the palace walls. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Night had fallen over the palace, but the darkness outside could not mask the tension inside. The chandeliers glimmered, casting long shadows across the walls, echoing the hidden fears and unspoken intentions of those within. Prince Harry moved quietly through the corridors, his mind a storm of calculations, strategies, and contingencies. The events of the past days had revealed the layers of ambition, manipulation, and secrecy embedded in the palace, and he knew that the moment of decisive action was approaching. Harry gathered his closest aides in a discreet chamber, a room chosen for its isolation and privacy. The ally who had emerged the day before provided critical insight, outlining the network of influence that had been operating beneath the surface. Every observation, every piece of evidence, every subtle signal was analyzed, cross-referenced, and mapped. Patterns emerged, revealing the intricacy of the plot and the sophistication of those orchestrating it. "What we're dealing with is more than personal ambition," Harry said, his voice steady but intense. "It's an entire strategy designed to manipulate perception, influence decisions, and control outcomes. We have to act before it reaches its peak. Timing is everything. One wrong move, and the consequences will be catastrophic." The aides nodded, their expressions tense but resolute. The palace had seen scandals before, but never with this level of complexity, subtlety, and danger. The hidden machinations they were about to expose threatened reputations, relationships, and public perception in ways that could not be ignored. Meanwhile, Meghan's evening engagements continued, but Harry could sense her growing unease. Though she maintained her composure publicly, subtle shifts betrayed anxiety. Her movements were measured, her tone carefully controlled, but the hidden observations, the patterns he had uncovered, and the realization that her network was being scrutinized were beginning to affect her. For the first time, the confidence she had cultivated for years seemed to waver, and it was in this vulnerability that Harry saw an opportunity. Catherine, still unaware of the full scope of the intrigue surrounding her, was focused on finalizing preparations for her lifestyle brand launch. Her energy was directed toward creative vision and strategic partnerships, oblivious to the silent war being waged in the corridors around her. But Harry knew the clock was ticking. The launch, the public attention, and the potential for interference made immediate action necessary. He could no longer wait for circumstances to unfold on their own. The first break came unexpectedly. A misstep, subtle yet revealing, by someone in Meghan's circle provided the opening Harry had been waiting for. A message, initially thought trivial, contained inconsistencies that could not be ignored. Cross-referencing it with previous observations confirmed suspicions. There were attempts to manipulate, delay, or obstruct Catherine's initiatives. The patterns were undeniable, and the evidence was irrefutable. Harry acted quickly, coordinating with his ally and aides to secure the first phase of intervention. It required precision, discretion, and a careful balancing of risks. Exposing too much too soon could provoke retaliation or escalate tensions. Waiting too long risked allowing the plot to proceed unchecked. Every decision carried weight, every action had consequences, and every moment was critical. The palace, usually a place of routine and ceremonial grace, had transformed into a stage of strategy, observation, and silent maneuvering. Staff members unknowingly intersected with the unfolding drama, their actions now carrying unintended significance. Courtiers, once confident in their positions, found themselves navigating uncertainty, tension, and suspicion. Even the most mundane interactions were imbued with potential consequences. As the intervention progressed, Harry uncovered additional layers of the plot. Contingency plans, coded messages, and veiled instructions indicated a far-reaching strategy that extended beyond what he had initially suspected. The complexity and audacity of the scheme were breathtaking, and the potential impact on Catherine's brand, public perception, and family relationships was profound. Yet amidst the tension, there were moments of clarity and opportunity. The Allies' insights revealed weak points, inconsistencies, and vulnerabilities in the plot. These became the focus of Harry's strategy. Carefully targeted actions designed to expose intentions, protect the vulnerable, and regain control of the unfolding narrative. The palace had become a chessboard, and Harry was calculating each move with meticulous precision. As night deepened, the first phase of exposure reached its culmination. Evidence, observations, and carefully orchestrated interventions had begun to unravel the hidden web. Patterns of manipulation, subtle threats, and covert influence were now visible, though only to those who knew where to look. The first cracks appeared in the carefully maintained facade of control, and the tension within the palace reached a crescendo. But just as the initial victories seemed within reach, an unexpected complication arose. A new message, delivered with silent precision, indicated that another player had been monitoring Harry's interventions. The warning was clear. The web of intrigue was more extensive than anyone had realized, and the next moves would be met with unforeseen challenges. The stakes had risen, the risks were higher, and the balance of power remained uncertain. Harry paused, considering the implications. Every move from this point forward would define outcomes in ways that could not be reversed. The palace, the family, and the public narrative were all in play, and the actions taken now would shape the trajectory of events in profound and unpredictable ways. And as he prepared for the next phase of intervention, a chilling thought struck him. The hidden plot was far from over, and the next revelation would shake the foundations of trust, loyalty, and power within the palace. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace had never felt so suffocating. The ornate ceilings and polished floors, symbols of centuries of stability and tradition, now seemed to close in around those navigating its corridors. Shadows stretched long under the chandeliers, mimicking the tension that now gripped every room, every corner. Prince Harry moved carefully, his steps measured, aware that every glance could reveal more than words ever could. The web of intrigue had grown denser, and he knew that one misstep could ignite consequences beyond control. Meghan, as poised as ever in public, was beginning to sense cracks in her carefully constructed world. Subtle anomalies, small but unmistakable, indicated that her maneuvering had not gone unnoticed. Notes, messages, and strategic observations now converged on her circle, exposing inconsistencies she had not anticipated. It was the first real moment where the awareness of scrutiny seeped into her confidence, introducing a vulnerability she had long suppressed. Harry had planned meticulously, using the insights of his ally and the patterns he had uncovered over the past days. But tonight required more than observation. It required a decisive move to test the plot, to force hidden intentions into the open, and to measure reactions. He orchestrated a scenario designed to draw out the key players, a carefully laid trap that would reveal both motives and capabilities without exposing the full scope of his strategy. The trap began subtly. A conversation, deliberately initiated, hinted at an upcoming decision regarding Catherine's lifestyle brand. Observers, unknown to Megan, were positioned strategically to monitor reactions. Every gesture, every inflection of voice, every microexpression would be recorded and interpreted. Harry understood that ambition, when pushed to the edge, often betrays itself, and this carefully constructed scenario was designed to reveal exactly that. Catherine, still unaware of the precise danger surrounding her, was informed of a simulated concern regarding her launch, a minor, seemingly routine delay in coordination. The presentation was designed to appear natural, an everyday administrative hiccup, yet it contained the elements necessary to provoke subtle reactions from those with vested interests. Harry's plan was to watch, wait, and record, turning observation into evidence while minimizing exposure to actual harm. As the conversation unfolded, Megan's responses began to shift. Small adjustments in posture, micro-hesitations, and the careful selection of words indicated rising agitation. Harry noted the calculated way she attempted to redirect the conversation, steer outcomes, and control perception. Yet the trap was effective. The careful manipulation could not be fully concealed. The network of hidden intentions, carefully built over months, began to show strain, exposing the vulnerabilities that Harry had suspected but could not previously confirm. The atmosphere in the room thickened with tension. Courtiers and aides, instructed to remain neutral, sensed a shift in the energy. The polite facades that had long masked ambition and rivalry were now cracking under pressure. Every glance, every subtle movement carried the weight of hidden knowledge, revealing more than words ever could. The trap was working, and the palace seemed to vibrate with the anticipation of exposure. Suddenly, a miscalculation, a minor slip in tone, a delayed response, a subtle acknowledgement, confirmed Harry's suspicions. The hidden intentions, the careful planning, and the network of influence were not merely theoretical. They were active, deliberate, and reactive. Megan's reactions betrayed not only awareness but a measure of desperation, a first indication that her confidence was being challenged effectively. Harry knew the moment of revelation was approaching. The trap, carefully constructed, had forced the plot into the open, creating evidence of intent, manipulation, and overreach. The palace, with all its traditions and meticulously maintained order, had become a stage for confrontation. Alliances, previously assumed secure, were now tested by subtle displays of strategy, observation, and reaction. Catherine, still largely unaware, sensed tension but could not yet grasp the magnitude of what was unfolding. Her focus remained on creative initiatives, strategic launches, and public perception. Yet even she could feel the undercurrent of calculated maneuvering, the silent currents of influence that now intersected with her plans in unpredictable ways. As the evening progressed, the trap reached its peak. Evidence had been gathered, reactions recorded, and vulnerabilities exposed. Harry's calculated scenario had succeeded in forcing hidden intentions into the open, confirming suspicions and providing the leverage necessary for subsequent actions. But the complexity of the web had not yet been fully revealed. There were layers, contingencies, and allies in unexpected places, all poised to respond in ways that could either stabilize or further destabilize the unfolding drama. And then came the final twist of the night. A new message, delivered with the precision of a whisper, indicated that another party had been observing both the trap and Harry's actions. The web was even more extensive than anticipated. The palace, with all its grandeur and centuries of controlled order, was now a theater of strategy, observation, and hidden intentions. The next move would not just influence outcomes. It could redefine relationships, trust, and loyalty within the family and beyond. Harry paused, absorbing the implications. Every action from this point forward carried heightened risk, but also the potential to expose truths that had long been hidden. The trap had succeeded, but the web was far from unraveled. The palace, the family, and the delicate balance of influence now depended on precise, calculated next steps. And as the night deepened, the first cracks in Meghan's carefully constructed world were undeniable. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace at dawn held a deceptive stillness. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting gold over the marble floors. Yet beneath the serene surface, an invisible tension pulsed through every corridor. Prince Harry moved with quiet determination, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on him. The confrontation, the trap, and the subtle maneuvering of the past days had revealed truths, but one final piece remained: undeniable, irrefutable evidence. The documents had been collected discreetly over the previous nights: letters, messages, schedules, and coded notes that collectively painted a chilling picture of calculated ambition. Each piece, by itself, could be dismissed as routine planning or coincidence, but together they formed a cohesive narrative, a roadmap of intent, manipulation, and threat. Harry knew that without this synthesis, any attempt to expose the plot would risk being dismissed or undermined. He gathered his closest aides and the ally who had first emerged. The small room, lined with books and dim light, became a war room of strategy. Pages were spread across the table, each annotated meticulously. Observations, timings, and cross-references were laid bare. The evidence revealed a deliberate pattern. Meghan's maneuvers were orchestrated not only to dominate public perception, but to undermine Catherine's initiatives at every step. The veiled threats, the coded instructions, and the manipulative communications were all connected. Harry's voice broke the tense silence. This isn't speculation. These documents, these patterns, they prove intent. The plot is real, calculated, and dangerous. And now, we have the proof. His words hung in the air like a weight, charged with the gravity of the revelation. The aides leaned in, examining the evidence, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and determination.